She lost everything in 47 seconds. One moment, Emily was presenting at a high-stakes meeting inside a Manhattan skyscraper. The next, her boss interrupted her mid-sentence and said, "That's enough. You're done here." Someone filmed it. Someone else uploaded it. And before the elevator doors closed behind her, the world had already decided who she was. A failure, a joke, a viral moment to laugh at. Millions watched her humiliation on loop. Strangers mocked her posture, her voice, her outfit. Even her silence became content. People she thought were friends stopped responding. Reporters camped outside her apartment. Brands distanced themselves. She became an online punching bag. But here's the strange thing. Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't rant online. She didn't beg to explain her side. She walked through Times Square with her phone in airplane mode, bought a coffee from a vendor she knew by name, and made her way to Central Park. There, she sat, alone on a bench, letting the early autumn air brush across her face. And she smiled, not because she was numb, but because she had trained for this moment long before it ever came. You see, the most powerful people on earth don't always look powerful. They don't shout. They don't defend. They don't clench their fists. Their strength isn't visible. It's silent. It's invisible. It's internal. Emily had something the world didn't understand. Inner anchor. A grounded presence so steady, even a hurricane of public shame couldn't pull her from herself. And now you're wondering, how? How does someone endure public destruction and remain calm? How does a person hold peace when everyone else is trying to take it? How does someone walk straight through fire and not get burned? That's the mystery. That's the power. That's what this story is about. Because if you've ever felt like you're one rude comment away from breaking, one bad day away from spiraling, one rejection away from forgetting your worth, this story is for you. Because you don't have to live like that, Emily D.I.D. in single quotes, and neither do you. The truth is, we've been trained wrong. We're taught that emotions are automatic, that we're supposed to feel everything deeply, all the time. That strength is loud, that calm is weakness. But that's a lie. There's a stillness inside you that no one taught you how to find. There's a version of you that can't be triggered, no matter what happens outside. Not because you don't care, but because you've remembered who you are. Emily found that version of herself before the world turned on her. She built it quietly, every morning. She would sit in silence and do one thing. She imagined herself as a mountain, still, steady, unmoving. The storm could rage, the trees could bend, the skies could howl, but the mountain never moved. She visualized roots growing from her spine into the earth. Breath by breath, she reminded herself, I am not the noise. I am not their opinion. I am not my fear. I am the calm behind it all. Over time, that image became real. So when the real storm came, she didn't need to try to be strong. She already was. That is the gift of the inner anchor. That is what we were never taught to build. And that is what you are about to discover. But before we go deeper, if this message already speaks to something inside you, I want to ask a small favor. If you find value in stories like these, stories that go deeper than surface tips and actually change how you see yourself, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it means the world. It helps keep this space alive so we can bring you more videos just like this. Now, a quick question for you, and I want you to drop your answer in the comments. Which kind of strength lasts longer? A. The strength to fight back loud and fast. B. The strength to stay calm and choose your moment. Let me know your answer below, A or B, and let's see what kind of power we're all building together. Marcus never realized how reactive he'd become until one afternoon in Chicago, when he found himself shouting at a barista for getting his coffee order wrong. It was the smallest mistake, a splash of cream instead of almond milk, but the flood of anger that rose inside him felt like something ancient, something automatic. And as soon as the words left his mouth, shame followed. Not because of the drink, but because deep down, he knew this wasn't about the coffee. It was about everything that had built up inside him, unnoticed, unexamined. That night, Marcus sat in silence and thought about all the times he'd exploded over small things. The email that felt like a slight, the friend who didn't text back fast enough, the person who didn't say thank you when he held the door open. Each moment ignited a storm inside him. But why? The truth came slowly. He'd been trained to react, not by one person, not by one event, but by the world itself. From the time we're children, we're handed a script. Be liked, be validated, fit in, achieve, don't mess up, look good, be better. It's relentless. And any time we fall short, or think someone else might see us as falling short, our minds go into survival mode. This training isn't obvious. It doesn't come with a warning label. It's hidden in the praise we crave and the shame we absorb. It's in the grades we're told define us, in the ads that tell us who we're supposed to be. It's in every highlight reel on social media that convinces us we're behind in life. Marcus realized he wasn't weak. He was programmed, and what scared him wasn't how angry he got. It was how quickly he gave his peace away, how easily the outside world could push a button and hijack his mood, his day, even his identity. So he started to look at his triggers, not as flaws, but as clues. Clues that pointed to the systems that shaped him. Clues that traced back to the moments he was told his worth came from how others saw him. Clues that whispered the truth. You were never taught how to hold yourself steady. This is the emotional hijack. It doesn't scream. It slips in quietly, convincing you that every feeling you have is real and justified. That your anger, your jealousy, your anxiety, they're just who you are. But the truth is, they're often just echoes of conditioning. Left unchecked, they run your life. Marcus decided to interrupt that pattern. He created something simple, something he could do every morning. No screens, no noise, just a pen, a notebook, and one question. Was that feeling mine, or was it trained into me? He called it his digital cleanse ritual. 10 minutes to detox his mind from the emotional noise of the internet. 10 minutes to ask himself what he believed and what he had just absorbed from scrolling past 100 strangers' opinions. He discovered that most of his stress didn't come from real life, it came from perception, from comparison, from performing, and most importantly, from forgetting who he actually was when no one was watching. This kind of awareness changes things. It doesn't make you perfect. It makes you conscious. It gives you space between the trigger and the response. And in that space, you can choose something different. Marcus didn't become a monk. He still got annoyed, still felt insecure sometimes. But the difference was, those feelings didn't own him anymore. He could see them for what they were, signals, not sentences. Invitations to look deeper, not commands to act. He began to treat his emotional reactions like traffic lights. Red meant stop, yellow meant pause, green only if the feeling was true and aligned with who he wanted to be. And slowly, he rewrote the way he moved through the world. What no one tells us is that the world profits from our reactivity. Social media thrives on outrage. Marketing thrives on insecurity. Drama thrives on quick tempers. But your peace, that's yours. And once you learn how to protect it, you become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, and easier to respect. Marcus still walks the same streets in Chicago, but he carries himself differently now. There's a quiet power in him, not because he stopped feeling, but because he stopped letting the world choose his feelings for him. And that is what emotional freedom looks like. The sun was setting on Venice Beach when it happened. Emily was walking along the boardwalk, taking in the ocean breeze, when a man passing by recognized her. His voice cut through the air, sharp and full of disdain. He didn't just say her name, he spat it, as if it were a curse. Then came the comment, cruel, public, deliberate. People turned their heads. Some laughed. Others just stared. Time slowed. Emily felt the jolt inside her chest, that familiar spike of adrenaline, the heat rushing to her face. Her body knew what to do next. Snap back, defend, run, hide. All the instincts fired at once, like a reflex built from 1,000 smaller wounds, but then, nothing. She didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She simply stopped walking and breathed. 5 seconds. 10. She felt the sand beneath her shoes, the wind in her hair, the sound of seagulls overhead. She felt herself return not to the moment, but to herself. Then, with quiet grace, she walked away. That is the power of the pause. Most people think strength means action, responding fast, hitting back harder, proving you're not the one to mess with. But Stoic strength lives in the opposite direction. It's not about the moment you strike. It's about the moment you don't. Emily had learned this lesson the hard way. After losing her job, her reputation, and most of her online dignity in a matter of days, she realized something terrifying. The world would always test you, but it was your response, not the world, that determined your peace. And for most of us, that response is automatic, because the brain is built to protect. When something feels like a threat, the amygdala, or fight or flight center, takes over. It hijacks the mind. It reacts. It doesn't think. It doesn't ask questions. It attacks or retreats. And in a modern world where threats aren't tigers, but texts, glances, tones, and tweets, that same old brain is still doing its job. But the Stoics knew better. So did neuroscience. There's a space, teeny but powerful, between the thing that happens and what you choose to do next. Viktor Frankl called it sacred. It's where your freedom lives. Not just your freedom to react, but your freedom to rewrite. The script that Emily began practicing a technique she called the power pause. Simple, but transformative. The moment something triggered her, she committed to silence for 5 seconds. No speaking, no reacting. Just breath, just presence. She trained her nervous system to wait, to cool, to process, and in that space, she would ask herself a question. What would the strongest version of me do right now? Not the most hurt, not the most offended, not the version addicted to defending her ego, but the strongest version, the grounded, wise, untouchable version. The answer was almost always nothing. Not because it wasn't worth responding to, but because her peace was worth more. The power pause changed everything. Arguments began to dissolve before they started. Passive aggression lost its grip. Triggers that once owned her lost their teeth. Because in those 5 seconds, she reclaimed her power. She reminded herself that she wasn't here to react to life. She was here to live it with clarity. And no, it didn't make her passive. It made her precise. When she did choose to respond, it was thoughtful, direct, clean, and that made her twice as effective. The power pause isn't about swallowing your feelings. It's about digesting them before you serve them to the world. It's about noticing the emotion and deciding if it aligns with who you want to be. It's about interrupting the emotional reflex long enough to let your higher self step in. And, like any skill, it takes practice. Emily started small. In line at the grocery store, in traffic, in arguments with people she loved. Each moment became a rep at the emotional gym. Some days, she failed, but she kept showing up, because she knew the cost of reactivity. She'd lived it. She also knew the reward of the pause, and it was priceless. There's a quiet power that grows when you stop letting everything get to you. When you stop being owned by your first emotion. When you make space for wisdom. It's not flashy. It's not dramatic. But it is rare. And it is real. And once you taste it, there's no going back. Marcus used to believe that every emotion he felt was evidence of truth. If he felt rejected, it meant someone was rejecting him. If he felt ignored, it meant he was being dismissed. If he felt anxious, it meant danger was close. Feelings were facts. End of story. Until one quiet morning in Austin, Texas, he sat down in a cafe with a pen, a notebook, and a thought that wouldn't leave him alone. What if the story I'm telling myself is wrong? It started with a text, or more accurately, a text that never came. He had reached out to an old friend 2 days earlier, expecting a reply. None came, and so, the spiral began. He must be upset with me. I said something wrong. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm not enough. It wasn't the silence that hurt, it was the narrative that filled the silence. That day, Marcus began to trace the pattern. How many of his worst emotional days were built, not on what happened, but on what he thought had happened. How often had his brain turned a blank look into an insult, a delayed response into rejection, a joke into humiliation. So, he made a decision that would change everything. He would challenge every story his emotions tried to tell. He began a practice he called reframe journaling. Every night, he'd write one moment that triggered him, followed by the story his brain attached to it. Then, he'd write down 3 alternate interpretations. Not positive spins, just possibilities. She didn't respond to your message. Story number 1. She's ignoring you. Story number 2. She's overwhelmed and hasn't had a moment to reply. Story number 3. She read it, smiled, and thought she'd reply later, then forgot. With each possibility, the emotional charge began to dissolve. The certainty gave way to curiosity. And in that space, Marcus found something new: freedom. He wasn't rejecting his feelings, he was questioning their source. That distinction changed the way he related to himself. Feelings were still valid, but they weren't final. They were clues, not commands. And slowly, Marcus began to rewrite the emotional narratives that had controlled him for years. He realized he wasn't being rejected nearly as often as he imagined. He wasn't being judged. He was just misreading signals through a lens colored by old wounds. That's when he developed a second practice, the hero lens method. He asked himself one question, over and over. If this were a movie, and I were the main character, what would this moment mean in the bigger story? Suddenly, bad days weren't failures. They were plot twists. Awkward conversations weren't embarrassments. They were development arcs. Lost opportunities weren't dead ends. They were redirections. By placing himself in the narrative as a protagonist instead of a victim, Marcus reclaimed authorship. Life didn't stop challenging him, but he stopped folding under the weight of every misunderstood detail. He learned to spot the old narratives. I'm too much. I don't belong. I always mess things up. These weren't truths. They were scripts he didn't remember agreeing to. And now, he could rewrite them. New scripts formed. I'm learning. I'm in process. I'm not defined by this moment. It wasn't overnight. Some days, the old stories returned, louder than ever. But each time, Marcus paused, questioned, and rewrote. Those stories lost power. He started to show up differently. Relationships, in work, in the mirror. His energy shifted. Not because life got easier, but because he was no longer at war with himself. That's the gift of narrative mastery. It doesn't mean you'll never feel pain. It means pain doesn't get to write your identity. Most people never stop to ask, is this the only way to see it? They live entire lives inside borrowed scripts. But Marcus learned that peace doesn't come from controlling life. It comes from changing the story you tell about it. Because there is no single truth in emotion. There's interpretation. And interpretation is power. What you choose to believe about a moment determines how that moment lives inside you. Reframe the story. And you don't just feel better, you become someone new. Not because life changed, but because you did. Florence was golden in the late afternoon sun. Emily sat alone at a small cafe near Piazza della Signoria. The clinking of glasses and distant church bells blending into a soft, timeless hum. In front of her sat a cappuccino, untouched, and beside it, her phone screen still glowing from the message she had just read. The words were sharp, designed to wound. They came from someone she had once trusted deeply. A betrayal wrapped in polite language, dressed as closure, but it was a clean cut, and she could feel its depth. She stared at the message for a long time, not because she didn't know how to respond, but because this time, she wasn't going to. It wasn't silence out of fear or uncertainty. It was silence out of strength. Emily understood something now that she hadn't known before. Not every insult deserves a reply. Not every wound needs to be reopened in the name of being heard. Some things are not worth touching twice. Some people are not worth being triggered by again. Detachment is often misunderstood. People think it's cold or cruel, that to disengage is to stop caring. But Emily had come to learn the truth, that real detachment isn't the absence of emotion. It's the presence of clarity. When we constantly react to everything that stirs us, we become emotionally bankrupt. Every minor offense costs us peace. Every little conflict steals time we'll never get back. And every toxic interaction we indulge in is a withdrawal from our own mental well-being. Emily started thinking of her energy like a budget, she called it emotional budgeting. Just like you wouldn't spend your last dollar on something meaningless. You shouldn't spend your peace on things that hold no real value, she asked herself daily. What in my life today deserves an investment of my attention, my emotion, my breath, and more importantly, what doesn't? That message she read, it didn't pass the test. Once, she would have crafted a long reply. She would have defended herself, explained her side, tried to be understood. But now, she simply turned the phone face down and watched the light dance across the marble steps of a centuries-old statue. The message no longer had power over her, because she no longer gave it meaning. There's a quiet revolution that happens inside you when you stop answering every call for drama, when you stop performing your emotions for people who never earned them. You start to feel something new. It isn't numbness, it's self-possession, a sense of returning home to yourself. Emily began to apply this to every corner of her life. Some people were just noise. Some conversations were circular traps. Some criticism was nothing more than projection. And the more she resisted the bait, the more she realized she wasn't avoiding life. She was finally choosing it. Not everyone deserves a reaction. Not every fight is yours to fight. Some people are not looking for resolution, they're looking for control. And when you respond, when you explain, when you plead, you hand them the reins of your peace. But when you say nothing, you say everything. You say, I know who I am, and I don't need you to remind me. You say, this story doesn't live here anymore. You say, I'm not available for chaos. And in a world addicted to noise, that silence is louder than any shout. There's power in walking away, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. There's power in not replying, not because you're afraid, but because you've realized your energy is sacred. It took Emily years to get here, to trust that stillness wasn't failure, to understand that silence could be a full sentence, to believe that not responding was sometimes the most dignified response of all. So as she sat there, watching the shadows grow long over Florence, she didn't feel regret. She felt light. She felt free. And she knew detachment wasn't distance from others, it was closeness to herself. And that, she realized, was the kind of strength no one could take from her. The desert air was still and warm as dusk, painted the Arizona sky in layers of rose and amber. Marcus sat cross-legged on a wooden deck overlooking the red rock formations of Sedona, the last light catching the edges of his journal. Not far from him, Emily sat in silence, her gaze resting on the horizon. They hadn't known each other long, just a few days into a stoic mindfulness retreat, but their connection ran deeper than familiarity. It was the bond of two people who had been broken by the noise of the world, and who had rebuilt themselves in quiet. Neither of them spoke for a while. They didn't need to. There was a peace between them that didn't require explanations, presence. And that was the very thing they'd both spent the last year chasing. Not the kind of peace you stumble into on vacation. Not the fleeting relief of things going your way. But the deeper, quieter kind. The kind you cultivate on purpose. The kind that lives inside you, no matter what the world tries to take. Marcus closed his journal and looked over at her. "You know what's funny," he said. "I used to think calm people were just detached, like they didn't feel as much. Now I realize they just feel differently. They choose how to feel." Emily smiled. "Exactly. People think this is about shutting down, but it's not. It's about turning inward, learning to sit with what's real, and letting go of what isn't." That word, letting go, used to scare them both. It sounded like giving up, but now it felt like release. They had both discovered the same truth in different ways, that the more you try to control how people see you, the more they control how you feel. That chasing approval, defending your worth, or reacting to every insult was a form of surrender. True power, real, grounded, unshakable power was something else entirely. It was becoming untouchable. Not untouchable because you're indifferent, but untouchable because you've stopped placing your peace in anyone else's hands. And that kind of peace, it's not a moment. It's a practice. It's in the decisions you make before the world even wakes up. In the way you breathe through your first anxious thought instead of letting it spiral. In the way you choose curiosity over judgment, stillness over noise, reflection over reaction. It's how you start your day. Marcus had a ritual, now a simple one, but sacred. Every morning, before looking at his phone, he asked himself 2 questions. What am I carrying that doesn't belong to me? And what kind of person do I want to be today? That small pause redirected his entire day from automatic reaction to intentional presence. Emily had something similar. She called it her daily stillness log. 3 times a day. She'd write down one moment when she was tempted to react, but didn't. She tracked her growth, not by how often she stayed calm, but by how conscious she became in her choices. And over time, those small acts added up, like layers of armor made not of steel, but of silence, self-awareness, and clarity. They weren't immune to emotion, but they were no longer prisoners to it. People noticed. Not because Marcus and Emily were louder, but because they had stopped shouting. Because their calm unsettled those who thrived on chaos. Because their presence reminded others of what it meant to be grounded. And yes, some people called them cold. Some misunderstood their boundaries as arrogance, but that didn't matter anymore. They weren't living for applause. They were living for truth, for alignment, for peace. The world still spun, full of noise and judgment and comparison. But now, they walked through it differently. Not above it, not separate from it, just untouched by it. Because here's the truth most people miss. Peace isn't found in escaping the world. It's found in mastering your response to it. And that mastery, it's built in the smallest moments, the breath before the reply, the thought before the story, the stillness before the storm. You don't need to control everything to be free. You just need to stop letting everything control you. That's what Marcus and Emily had found in the desert. Not perfection, not enlightenment, just enough quiet to hear their own minds again. And from that quiet, they didn't build walls, they built freedom. So now the question is yours to answer. What kind of power will you practice today? Emily and Marcus came from opposite ends of the country, New York and Chicago, 2 cities known for noise, ambition, speed. On the surface, they had little in common. One lost her job in a public spectacle, the other lost himself quietly in private spirals. But beneath their separate stories ran the same current. Both had been shaped, manipulated, and overwhelmed by a world that feeds on reaction, thrives on insecurity, and offers very little space for stillness. Their journeys were different, but their pain was familiar. Emily knew what it felt like to be publicly humiliated, to have her reputation reduced to a meme, to wake up and realize the world no longer saw her as a person, but as a punchline. Marcus knew what it was like to drown in overthinking, to live on edge, constantly bracing for rejection, disappointment, or betrayal. They both knew what it was like to be triggered by everything, and exhausted by it. And yet, by the time they met in Sedona, Arizona, they were different people. Not because life had become easier or kinder, but because they had stopped handing their inner world over to the chaos outside them. They had done something most people never think to do. They took their power back. Emily did it by learning to sit in silence, to ground herself in an inner anchor that couldn't be shaken. She learned to pause, to choose her response, and to detach from anything that didn't serve her peace. Marcus did it by rewriting the emotional stories he had once accepted without question. He reframed pain, reclaimed his narrative, and decided to stop living as a puppet pulled by every emotional string. Together, they practiced presence, stillness, discipline, awareness, and what they found wasn't emotional numbness, it was emotional sovereignty. They didn't stop feeling. They felt deeper, but now they chose how to feel, when to feel, and who got to influence those feelings. They weren't cold, they were clear, they weren't withdrawn, they were wise. What their stories reveal is this: the path to peace isn't a retreat from life, it's a mastery of how you meet life. That's the real practice of Stoicism. It's not about being stoic in the way people misunderstand. It's shut down, hardened, distant. It's about learning to master your response so that no one and nothing can steal your peace without permission. In a world that rewards outrage, glorifies drama, and weaponizes emotion, Marcus and Emily chose something radical. They chose calm. They chose to unplug the control panel strapped to their chest. They chose to stop dancing to every provocation. And because of that choice, they became something the world doesn't know how to handle: untouchable. Now, here's the lesson. You don't need your life to be quieter to find peace. You need your mind to be steadier. You don't need the world to validate you. You need to stop looking outward for something that was never meant to come from outside. You can start small. Take a breath before you react. Question the story before you believe it. Pause before you explain yourself to someone who isn't even listening. Detach not from people, but from the power you once gave them over your emotions. Build a daily practice. Journal. Sit in stillness. Limit your exposure to emotional junk food. Invest your energy like it's currency. Protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. And most importantly, remember, you don't have to react to everything. Sometimes, the strongest move is staying still. Sometimes, the wisest response is silence. Sometimes, walking away isn't weakness, it's mastery. So now I want to hear from you. What part of Emily or Marcus's journey resonated with you the most? Was it learning to pause before reacting? Letting go of emotional hijacks? Rewriting your inner story? Or choosing who gets access to your peace? Drop your answer in the comments, and feel free to share your own reflections. Your insights might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if this story spoke to something inside you, something tired of being pulled in every direction, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It's free, but it helps this channel grow and bring you more videos that go deeper, hit harder, and help you become the calmest person in any room. Thanks for being here. Stay grounded and keep walking the quiet path.